All right, so get this. You send us this legal case from the Philippines, GR number 2111149, and man, this thing is wild. We're talking broken promises, a computer school caught in the crossfire, enough legal twists to make your head spin.
Oh, I love a good contract dispute. And from what I'm seeing in these documents, this one's a doozy. Really highlights how something as seemingly simple as a franchise agreement can go off the rails.
Buckle up, listeners, because we're diving headfirst into the world of contracts, bad faith dealings, and maybe even a little Shakespearean tragedy for good measure.
Shakespearean, huh? Now you got me hooked.
Well, picture this. It's the 1990s in the Philippines. Technology is booming, everyone's chasing dreams. Enter AMA Computer Learning Center, ACLC as they're known, and they hand this 10-year franchise agreement to a guy named Oscar Arcinue. His mission, if he chooses to accept it, is to open a brand spanking new computer school in Dagupan City. Seems straightforward enough, right?
Seems like it. Franchising is everywhere, but this case is a perfect example of how those details, those little clauses, can really trip you up.
And trip they did. ACLC, smart cookies that they are, put this clause in the agreement saying any transfer of the franchise needed their official seal of approval. Remember that little nugget? Because, oh boy, does it come back.
The old transfer clause. Often ignored, always important. These things can turn into legal minefields, especially in the franchise world where brand reputation is everything.
Right. So fast forward 3 years, Arcinue, well, he hasn't exactly been breaking ground on this school. Instead, he does something kind of bold, let's call it. He sells the franchise to this other aspiring entrepreneur, Alice Baun, for a cool P85,000. But the kicker, he does it all without a single word to ACLC.
Yeah, that's textbook breach of contract right there. Imagine buying a car, right, and then you find out the seller, they didn't even own it. Throws the whole deal into chaos.
Total legal landmine.
Yeah.
And poor Baun, totally in the dark, dives right in. She's leasing a building, hiring architects, the whole shebang. Seeing what she put into it really drives home how big the consequences of this breach become.
Absolutely. This is why due diligence is so crucial. Any big business deal, especially a franchise, verify everything, do your research, cover your bases.
Sadly, sounds like maybe that step was missed.
But the truth always comes out, right? ACLC gets wind of Baun's involvement, and let's just say they were less than thrilled. They send Arcinue this not-so-subtle message, basically saying, hey, remember us. Remember that agreement. Any transfer. Needs are okay.
They're asserting their rights, plain and simple. These are the rules. We're sticking to them.
But Arcinue, oh, he goes silent. When he finally pops back up, he tries to get ACLC on board with another attempt to sell the franchise through Baun again, but guess what? Still, no paperwork. No paper trail. It's like he thought he could just wish the contract away.
That's just blatant disregard, not even for the contract itself, but for any kind of legal process. That's where we start talking about bad faith. In ACLC, well, they'd had enough.
Yeah.
1997 rolls around, and they officially terminate Arcinue's franchise. They cite his failure to, actually do anything with it. And, of course, those very unauthorized transfer attempts.
From their end, totally justified. The contract was broken multiple times. He basically handed them the keys and said, go for it.
And right in the middle of all of this, Alice Baun. She decides to take legal action, files a lawsuit against both Arcinue and ACLC. But here's where things take a turn. In 2009, before the case is settled, Baun passes away.
Talk about another layer of complexity. When a party in a case dies, it raises all sorts of legal questions, really impacts how things move forward.
It's a gut punch, honestly. But her siblings, determined to get some justice, pick up where she left off. And that, dear listeners, is where we're going to pick up in the next part of our deep dive. We'll go inside the courtroom, break down the arguments, and untangle the aftermath of this whole contractual mess. And we're back. Last time, we left our legal drama right on the doorstep of a Philippine courtroom. Baun, or rather her siblings, are still fighting for justice, determined to hold Oscar Arcinue accountable. Really makes you think, contracts. They're not just words on paper. This stuff has real impact.
No doubt about it. And in this part of the story, bad faith takes center stage. Remember how Arcinue sold something he didn't even own the rights to? Totally ignored the rules. Yeah, the Philippine legal system. They don't take kindly to that.
Okay, so for the folks at home who haven't been to law school like myself, I might add, what does bad faith actually mean here? What were the courts looking at?
Imagine this. You lend a friend your favorite signed baseball. Pristine condition, right? Next thing you know, they've turned around and sold it, claiming it was theirs the whole time. That's bad faith. Intentional dishonesty, disregard for agreements, just a touch of mischief thrown in for good measure.
Yikes. Not a good look for that, friend. So when this all landed on the regional trial court's desk, whose side did they take?
They came down firmly on the side of ACLC. They saw Arcinue's actions for what they were. The unauthorized sale, the disappearing acts, zero documentation. It all screamed bad faith.
So what'd they decide? What were the consequences for, let's call them Arcinue's creative business practices?
The court, they hit him where it hurts. The wallet. He was ordered to pay damages, and not just a slap on the wrist. We're talking covering Baun's financial losses, all those investments she made. Plus, ACLC's potential income for the, 7 years that the school was basically non-existent because of this whole debacle.
Oof. Adding insult to injury there? Pete Arcinue wasn't too happy about that.
You'd think not. He decided to appeal, took the case to the Court of Appeals.
Yeah.
His argument, he tried to say that ACLC had actually implied their consent, by talking to Baun, helping her scout locations, claimed they were acting in bad faith, tried to flip the script.
Slick. Did it work?
Not a chance.
Yeah.
The Court of Appeals upheld the original decision. They saw right through it, ACLC's interactions. That wasn't approval. That was them trying to clean up his mess.
Trying to put out a fire they didn't start. Sounds like Arcinue just kept digging himself deeper. But he didn't give up there, did he? Isn't there a saying about how a person who represents themselves in court has a fool for a client?
Something like that. He decided to aim for the legal inventory. Hail Mary took the appeal all the way to the Supreme Court of the Philippines.
The Supreme Court. Now we're in the big leagues. What happened when Arcinue stepped into the ring with the heavy hitters? Back to the show, folks. We've climbed to the top of the legal mountain here. The Supreme Court of the Philippines. This is it, the final word. So, did Arcinue manage to sway the highest court in the land?
Keep in mind, when the Supreme Court takes a case like this, they're mostly focused on whether the law was applied correctly, not so much on rehashing every tiny detail. Think of them as like legal referees making sure everyone's playing by the rules.
Less about the nitty-gritty, more about the bigger picture.
Exactly. And here, Arcinue really tried to hammer that whole bad faith argument again, insisted he didn't owe those damages. But the Supreme Court, they weren't convinced. They sided with the lower courts. Arcinue breached the contract, acted in bad faith. End of story.
3 strikes, you're out. Guess he learned the hard way that breaking contracts in the Philippines, not a good idea. But, we can't forget about Alice Baun. She's gone, and it's her family still fighting for her. How'd the Supreme Court factor that in?
Huge point, and they addressed it directly. They confirmed that even though Baun had passed away, her claim against Arcinue was still valid. They were saying this wasn't just about a contract, it was about holding someone accountable for the harm they caused.
Justice even in her absence, that's powerful.
It really is. Shows that breaching contracts, it's not just a slap on the wrist. The consequences, they're real, they last.
Before we wrap up, there's this one detail that caught my eye. The Supreme Court, they actually made a small change to the original ruling, right? Something about how the interest on the damages was calculated.
Oh, good catch. You're right. They upheld the damages, but they clarified that the interest should be calculated using the latest guidelines from more recent cases.
Keeping everything consistent, up to date.
Precisely. The Supreme Court often uses decisions to not only resolve the case in front of them, but to clarify the law for future cases. They reference a case involving Laura's gift shop to make things crystal clear going forward.
Always refining, always improving the system. So after all this legal back and forth, what's the takeaway for our listeners? What wisdom can we glean from this deep dive into contracts and bad faith dealings?
Big one. Knowing what you're signing, especially in business. Absolutely crucial. Due diligence, it's not just a fancy phrase, it's self-protection.
Don't just sign on the dotted line. Read the fine print, do your research, make sure everything is on the up and up.
Absolutely. And remember, trying to skirt your obligations, acting in bad faith, it can come back to bite you. Legally, financially, it's just not worth it.
Words to live by. It's a shame it even had to get to this point. What if Arcinue had just been upfront with ACLC from the start? Maybe none of this would happen.
Interesting to think about. Open communication, transparency, trying to find a solution together, that can prevent a whole world of legal trouble.
So much better to do things the right way. Well, on that note, we'll leave our listeners with that thought. This case might be closed, but the conversation about ethical business and honoring agreements, that's always relevant.
Well said. Proof that even the most complex legal battles have lessons for everyone.